Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 8th and last day of O2LAC Virtual Week 2020. We made it to the last day, guys, and it's good that we did because we have a fantastic session ahead of us. I'm very happy to introduce our speakers today, but before, a brief intro about the event, the very last one of the day. For the past 9 years, O2LAC has offered a space for technology service companies from across Latin America and the Caribbean to network, to explore business opportunities through our matchmaking system, and to learn about the latest trends in technology directly from the companies who are pushing the envelope in their respective areas. Over the last 8 days, we've had fantastic sessions featuring topics that range from AR/VR to entrepreneurship, e-commerce, video games, animation, automation, marketing, the subscription economy yesterday, and fintech. If you missed any of these past sessions, make sure that you check out O2LACvirtual.com where you can still enjoy the recordings. We also invite you to check out today's agenda. Cisco, one of our partners for this event, will be presenting a couple of sessions today, a panel right after this, and then a workshop in the afternoon at 4:30. And you cannot miss Eugenio Pache, CEO and co-founder of Auth0, the identity as a service provider that just raised a Series F round of $120 million last week, bringing a valuation to almost $2 billion. So that's at 3 p.m. today. Today's session will be conducted entirely in English. La sesión de hoy será en inglés, así que los invitamos a utilizar el botón de interpretación simultánea que encontrarán en la parte de abajo de su ventana. Lastly, we invite you to share your questions for today's presenters on the chat. The team will be reviewing them, and we will share a couple of them before the session ends. As you know, today's session is called The Future of PropTech Post-COVID-19, and we are joined by two fantastic speakers. I want to start by giving a very warm welcome to our special guest today, Thomas Tigre Wenrich. Tigre is the CEO of Lab Ventures, an early-stage PropTech investor and incubator. He's also a former partner at the Boston Consulting Group and past CFO of Open English. Tigre is a board advisor and mentor to startup founders. Welcome, Tigre, and thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to welcome back Fabricio Perti, manager of the integration and trade sector at the Inter-American Development Bank, and who is the leader behind all of this that you've been seeing for the past 8 years and 8 days, and founder of O2LAC. Fabricio will start us off with a brief intro. Fabri, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us again.
Well, thank you so much, Itzel, and Tigre. Welcome also, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all in attendance. Congratulations on making it to the final day of this virtual special O2LAC. It's been an honor. It's been a huge ride for us. Today's session starts off with more than 5,000 registered entrepreneurs, business women and men from 66 countries. From our region, for Europe, Asia, and Africa. The event has had 30 very high-level thematic sessions with 80 recognized speakers, and what's very important, more than 950 entrepreneurs have participated in more than 1,000 bilateral business meetings, and many more are also taking place in the parallel virtual communications that all of this event creates. So it's been great. And one thing also, more than 200 companies have already told us that they closed business deals during this virtual week. So that's we think is very important. And before jumping into the panel, since it's my last intervention here in O2LAC, I'd like to thank my team. Gerardo, Itzel, Manu, Jose, Rodrigo, Fontan, Maria, you guys have been so professional, so dedicated, and it's been great. So thanks once again to everyone. So today we're going to talk about PropTech, which is really interesting for us, and we're going to learn a lot from Tigre. This is really a new vertical for us in O2LAC. We've done audio, visual, animation, video games, finance, accounting, engineering, architecture, but not PropTech. And after much reading on the topic, we found one definition that we particularly liked, PropTech being one small part of a wider digital transformation in the property industry, and it considers both the technological and the mentality change of the real estate industry and its consumers to our attitudes, movements, and transactions involving both buildings and cities. So this applies from finding mortgage financing to finding brokers to virtual tours to obtaining title and even renting. So PropTech is a technology and the technological transformation of this increasingly important industry as PropTech itself. Of course, real estate is a huge asset class. Investment in PropTech companies globally hit $14 billion in the first half of 2019, and that was a more than a 300% hike from the first half of 2018. And we have a lot of Latin American entrepreneurs here and from the technology space, and we think that this is very important for our region, PropTech in particular, for some reasons in particular. High urbanization in Latin America and the Caribbean has the highest share of city dwellers in the world. We have 80% of our population lives in cities. We're still our housing is still very informal, so there's a lot of informality in housing, and there's a space and opportunity to improve that. Of course, the immense value of real estate, and also the strong investor confidence which PropTech technology has attracted. Startups and companies like the ones in Outsource to LAC can contribute to simplify, digitize processes in this field. So I will now pass the word to our very esteemed panelist today, Tomás Tigre Wenrich, Managing Partner of Lab Ventures. The virtual floor is yours, Tigre. Welcome and thanks again.
Thank you, Fabricio. Let me just share my screen here. There we go. So the old adage that location, location, location are the only factors that matter in real estate no longer rings quite as true. Tech innovation is bringing new opportunities, like Fabricio just said, to real estate operators, investors, and it's allowing a whole new class of startups to disrupt traditional business models in what is the largest and one of the most archaic industries on the planet. According to a recent McKinsey study, the construction industry specifically has the absolute lowest level of digitization of any sector in the US economy. Their digitization index is a composite of a number of different metrics that basically show to what extent new digital technologies are being used in different industries. And unsurprisingly, digitization is highly correlated to labor productivity growth. And so construction has actually been suffering declining productivity over the past decade. Every year it gets worse. The real estate industry has done a little better in terms of productivity and still lags far behind other sectors of the economy in digitization. And so this fact is really the fundamental driver for the recent explosion in what we're calling PropTech. Over the past 6 years, over $70 billion of venture capital funding has been deployed into over 1,000 startups, and many more thousand have been founded, but haven't gotten significant funding yet. New PropTech companies are popping up literally every day. These companies provide technology solutions to the real estate and construction industries. And as you can see, it's been growing very, very fast. Last year alone was over $30 billion. So what's included in PropTech? What do we mean with that term? Last year, E&Y published a really good report that kind of breaks down those numbers into categories. The largest bucket by far has been is flowed into companies that are disrupting the traditional transactional processes of the industry, mostly focused on residential to date. So think about Zillow, which is really the poster child of the first wave of PropTech investment. Zillow's been around for quite a while, but they've given consumers direct access to the MLS, the multiple listing service that's critical in the US. If you want to sell your house, the only way to get it out there to the community of buyers is to be on the MLS, and traditional real estate agents have had a stranglehold on that service. But now, through Zillow and other competing sites, any consumer can go on and see all the houses that are for sale in any given area. And in fact, well over half of all home buyers in the US now start their search on Zillow, often even before they have engaged a realtor. More recently, in the same category, we've seen a lot of investment going into what they call iBuyers, companies like Opendoor and Redfin that use algorithmic pricing models to buy homes sight unseen, and of course without a broker. And even Zillow itself launched an iBuying service about 2 years ago. The second category that's received quite a lot of this funding and a lot of the media attention is flexible space, which includes co-working, co-living, and these new short-term rental platforms like Sonder or Selena, which you probably know in Latin America. Of all these companies, WeWork has captured the largest share of those $23 billion, and its problems over the last year have been an inconvenient truth for the PropTech sector, a lot of negative publicity. But this is really just one part of PropTech. Smaller categories include property management, tenant experience, smart buildings. We're very excited about construction technology, which is kind of considered a subcategory of PropTech. It's one that's lagged behind so far, but we see a lot of potential going forward for tech adoption in construction based on what the first slide I showed you. You've also got a little bit of money going into some big data startups, 3D visualization technologies, and these are things that are only just getting started, but also which we think could be really, really big over the next decade. So that's a snapshot of what's happened in the past. What's going on now in the world of COVID-19? So this is right before the pandemic. MetaProp, a New York startup accelerator, has an annual PropTech investor confidence survey. And as you can see here, it was still very positive in February. A little bit less dynamic than prior years, which is understandable given just how the absolute amount of capital that went into the sector last year. But still, 45% of investors expected to invest more in 2020 in PropTech than they did in 2019, while only 40% expected to invest less. So still a net positive sentiment. Now that, of course, was before COVID-19. In the same report, which was actually published in April, so they had time to start talking about the pandemic, they laid out this framework to talk about how is COVID-19 going to affect the PropTech sector. So of the categories that were already kind of in motion, as they say, flexible space, iBuying have really been impacted negatively. If you think about co-working, co-living, what is it? It's basically the idea of putting a bunch of people together in very close quarters, exactly the opposite of social distancing. So that is really, that sector is being challenged a lot, as has the short-term rental business, which has really been decimated by the overall slowdown in the travel sector. The iBuyers have all pretty much stopped buying houses. Their algorithms work in kind of normal times, but this is such a huge shock to the system that it's just unclear which way real estate markets are going to go. So most of the iBuyers have pretty much stepped out of the market for now. Now that said, the vast majority of technologies are actually getting a boost. Anything designed to assist remote work, remote transactions, touchless experiences are obviously going to be in much higher demand now more than ever. Just as an example, we launched an online title company in Miami in January, and they perform fully remote real estate closings. You don't have to go and sit down with your real estate agent and your lawyer and the other side and everybody signs. Those days are gone. And so despite the fact that home sales in Miami are down by half from where they were before the pandemic, our transaction volume for this title agent continues to grow at double-digit rates month over month. You know, I've always said that one of the biggest barriers to adoption of technology in the real estate industry generally is that, you know, they say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The reality of real estate is it's been a pretty easy business to make money in, doing things the same old way. And so, you know, why change? It's very different now. So as margins are soft, volumes are down, a lot more competition, adopting cost-saving technologies that used to be nice to have is now a vital strategy for survival. So we're seeing a lot of these technologies actually accelerate. And then there's a third kind of bucket of things that really hadn't gotten much traction before COVID-19, but are now all of a sudden in demand. Think about cleaning robots, automated facial recognition to access a building. We just invested in a company that uses facial recognition to track labor on a construction site for construction jobs. They collect data for automating payroll, but they also, with the pandemic, they've now been able to include automatic check that workers have the appropriate safety gear, face mask, and it really facilitates contact tracing. If someone does end up getting the virus, they know which job site they've been on, when, and who else was there that day, and they have cell phone numbers of those people to let them know right away. So it's interesting how that business has pivoted into a sort of very useful product for the pandemic. So as we've seen on these previous pages, PropTech has really become a big trend in the US over the past 4 or 5 years. The surge in Latin America has been a lot more recent, but over $500 million have been invested in Latin America PropTech in the last 12 months. A lot of people are probably familiar with the Brazilian unicorns Loft and Quinto Andar, which are the better known examples, and they raised really large rounds. But there's a lot of interesting companies that are getting funded in other places too: Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Argentina. I've listed here a few of the larger deals from the last 12 months. You know, one of them we invested in, for example, BrickSave, company based in Argentina that allows middle-class, kind of emerging market investors to access real estate investments that pay current cash flow, so dividends, denominated in dollars or in euros, real estate in the US. So if you have a couple $1,000s and you're in Buenos Aires and you can't really access real estate investments, you haven't been able to traditionally, with this, you can go and buy a fractional share of a rental property in Miami, and every quarter you'll get your check. So that's been an interesting one for us. So we are excited about Latin America and the potential. Going forward for the next year and a half or so, we've identified 5 trends that we're particularly interested in and watching. The first one is virtual reality. You know, it sort of seems like this has been the next big thing for a long time now, and it never really takes off. And I'm not talking about the big heavy goggles that kind of induce nausea and look ridiculous, but the same technology that goes into building those experiences can generate a 3D rendering of a real estate project in great detail, very, very quickly, and very much faster, much cheaper than the traditional sort of having an artist actually create a static rendering. Here you can have an interactive 3D model. You can walk a customer through a space. You can change finishings on the fly, so they can see, what if I did this in brick instead of in tile? It's a really interesting technology. And as some interesting startups are coming into the fold that make creation of these experiences much, even still faster and cheaper, I think it's going to start getting deployed much, much more widely. Today, if you have a real estate development and you want to create one of these 3D experiences, you basically hire an agency that goes and custom designs this for you. But with some of these new tools, there's actually a couple of interesting companies from Latin America that are attacking this problem, very early stage companies. There's one in Panama called Housed, one from Mexico called At Home. And they permit the development of these things at a way lower cost. And so we think that that's going to be a technology that finally starts to get traction in the next couple of years. Second one is construction management. I talked about construction tech being a little bit further behind. We're seeing that there's starting to be a lot more interest among construction companies in figuring out how to deploy technology. The first big innovations were more around the design side. So think about BIM models and Procore, which is the huge construction management software company, but there haven't been a lot of things around, on the job site, how to facilitate and make more efficient the construction process. We've seen that there's dozens of really interesting startups that have launched, like the one I mentioned, which is based in Miami, called Smart Barrel, that does the worker check-in. There's dozens of others attacking all different kinds of parts of the process, but they're all very, very early stage and have not had a ton of traction yet. We think that's about to change, and that the growth going forward, as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's not going to be in co-working and co-living. It's going to be, a lot of it's going to be in construction management. The other thing in construction, which is not really a new technology, off-site fabric or prefab has been around for decades. But what we're seeing that's new is a lot of startups taking a very modular approach to do small buildings to like what they call adjacent dwelling units. So if you want to have a backyard cottage, whether it's to move a family member, your old parents, or the in-law house, or possibly as a rental, sorts of rental income, that's a trend that's really taking off to address the housing shortage. And there's a lot of startups that are doing this in a new way that's cheaper, faster, more energy efficient, incorporates smart building technologies. And again, this is one where lots of startups, most of them don't have very much traction yet. We invested in a really exciting one based in Seattle called Node. It's unclear who the winner is going to be, and there'll probably be multiple winners, but we think we're going to start seeing this. It may take a little bit for the pandemic to pass, because zoning and regulatory is a barrier to adoption. But the economic benefits of this model are so tremendous that we think it's really going to start to happen in practice. Big data, particularly around commercial real estate, we think is another one that's going to really start to shake out. Again, we've talked to dozens of companies that have different big data solutions using artificial intelligence to kind of try and, the classic question is, for a developer, what's going to be the next Brooklyn? How do I figure that out? How do I, instead of looking at lagging data, like the income per capita in a zip code, how can I look at leading indicators to figure out what's going to be the next Brooklyn, or in our case in Miami, the next Wynwood? What's the next hot neighborhood going to be, and how can I predict that as opposed to and be on the leading edge? And again, there's lots of these. We think that, we don't know which ones yet, but we think that 2 or 3 of them will really start to move ahead of the pack and start to gain wide-ranging adoption, because the power of this technology is just too great for that not to happen. And lastly, on flexible space, I actually don't think that this is the end of co-working. I think WeWork is an anomaly, had its own problems that were unique to the company. But the idea of co-working and flexible space, short-term contracts is very, very powerful. We think we're going to see continued growth, but it's going to be different. I call it Flex Space 2.0, the landlord strikes back, because it's going to be, I think, much more the economic value is going to flow to the asset owner as opposed to the co-working operators. We're going to see a lot of co-working companies go out of business. New contracts with landlords are going to be either management fee based, more like a hotel model, where as opposed to the co-working space just being the tenant and taking all the risk, and then of course going out of business potentially and leaving the landlord with nothing. We think the landlords are going to actually get in, they're going to adopt this model for part of their space, and we'll see it, we'll actually see it continue to grow. We talked, just incidentally, talking about Latin America, we spoke to a really interesting company the other day in Mexico that's taking corporations' excess office space. So if you lease 10,000 square meters and you're only using 6,000 of it, you can put the other 4,000 on a marketplace for someone else to use. And the startup sort of does the co-working setup. Now that's really flexible space. So we think there's going to be a lot of new solutions, but the co-working trend isn't going to end anytime soon. So let me just wrap up my prepared remarks here with a little bit about us at the lab and what we do, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I'm the CEO of Lab Miami Ventures, as Fabricio said. We started Miami's original co-working space, which is the image here on my virtual background. It's in the Wynwood Arts District, a really trendy, hot neighborhood now in Miami. A lot of entrepreneurs have moved in there since we opened. But it's just a co-working space. It's been a real focal point for the Miami tech scene. And we decided that we had to do something with it, as opposed to each of us just doing our own angel investments, which is how we started. And we launched a startup studio, or what I guess in Latin America would be called a company builder. So about 3 years ago, we started the company builder, venture studio, and we build startups from scratch. We come up with ideas, we test them, we bring in co-founders, and we launch them into the market. So we've started 6 startups. 4 of them are actually PropTech companies. We have a co-living business for college students, a flat fee brokerage, a software for managing delinquent tenants, and then I mentioned the online title company, which incidentally just this week raised an $800,000 investment round, which was led by a Chilean venture capital fund, which we're super excited about, Beagle Ventures, for those of you who might have heard of it. So we got so excited about the PropTech space that last year we decided that we're also going to raise a venture capital fund ourselves, so we can continue to fund these projects and also invest in other people's startups. So we're planning to close on a $50 million fund sometime in the next 3 months. We'll be targeting seed stage PropTech companies from all over the world. And primarily, I think it'll be North America, but we're open to looking at startups from anywhere. The investors in the fund are mostly from the real estate industry, so developers, architects, brokers, construction companies, and they're typically from Florida and from Latin America. And they're interested, obviously, in making the financial returns that come with venture investing, and that's our most important goal. But they're also interested in staying informed on what's the latest in the PropTech market and how can they use these technologies in their own businesses. So we can act as sort of an outsourced R&D department to our LPs and help them stay on the leading edge. These same investors then also become potential customers for the startups that we invest in. So any companies that want to expand into the Florida real estate market or move into Latin America, or from Latin America into Miami for that matter, can benefit from this network. So it's a win-win-win situation. We expect that to, like I said, we expect that to be operational in the fourth quarter. We've already made a few investments. I mentioned Smart Barrel, BrickSave, Node. So that's what we're doing. PropTech, we've kind of honed our focus over the last several years, and we're 100% focused on PropTech, and we believe it's going to continue to grow as much or faster than ever.
Thanks so much, Tigre, for your words, for your presentation. It's been really fascinating to learn about this, and I think it's going to attract a lot of interest from our audience. We'd like to start interacting and formulating some questions for you, and delving a little bit more into the co-working space. We're all a little bit anxious about what's going to happen to us, right? If we're going to keep working here from our bedrooms and our kitchens, or at some point go back to the office. And co-working has played an important role in Miami's tech entrepreneurship ecosystem in recent years. So how can we continue to foster that collaboration, that innovation, which results from entrepreneurs co-working together and also connecting with the capital and the financial resources they need to succeed? It's kind of broke, so how do we kind of fix it? That would be a first question we'd like to ask you, Tigre.
Yeah, no, it's I don't have the answer. I can tell you what our experience has been. It's a huge challenge. This space looks very full because that's an old photograph, but I'll probably go in later today, and there's not a lot of people there. I think there's a couple things going on. This style of co-working space, which is large open area, pack people together. Literally, when we launched it, we talked about the objective being creating creative collisions between entrepreneurs. That's not what you want to do today with this pandemic. And so this kind of space is going to be difficult to maintain. But there's a lot of spaces that WeWork is a good example. I mean, WeWork will be several times larger than our space. They'll have a small area that looks kind of like this, and they'll have lots of small private offices. And the point is, it's flexible in terms of its month to month. You can get 1, 2, 3. You can expand up, expand down. That is what I think is going to continue to grow. And while some people are scared to go in, don't want to venture out, and given the current situation in Miami, I don't want to encourage anyone to venture out in the short term. But in the longer term, people are going to want to go back to have an office. You can't work from home your whole life, especially people who have young kids. I mean, it's and we have a bunch of folks that actually never did go home. There are people using the space, and as larger employers, Facebook famously announced that half of their worldwide staff is going to be remote workers. That's going to drive demand for co-working. Those people don't all want to work in their bedrooms. They want to have a nice place to work with the amenities and to be able to see other people. So I think the long-term prospects are still strong, but it's going to be redesigned. I don't know if the Lab Miami is kind of our origin for Lab Ventures. It's not really a very big part of our business. I don't know if this is going to survive in its current state. It may not. But as I said, flexible space is going to continue. The bigger challenge, which you mentioned, is how do you support startups and try and provide some of the same benefits that before it was put everybody together and kind of hope they meet up and extract some value, and that's not going to work anymore. So we've started doing more like this online programming. With our own companies, we have they're all working from home. Actually, all of our entrepreneurs have left the lab. My core team goes in sometimes, but the startups don't. So we have weekly Zoom meetings with each of our entrepreneurs. We're screening new startups on Zoom. We haven't made any investments yet without meeting someone in person, and so we're going to have to. We're going to have to learn to do that. That's going to be challenging. But yeah, I find it's relatively easy to maintain a culture once you've developed it in a community. But how do you bring new people on board and maintain that? I don't know. I don't do the kind of networking that I used to do. It's hard to network on Zoom. So I think there's the events the people who do events professionally, like this one. And I know you guys have experimented with a bunch of new stuff this year. I mean, they're crazy hard working on how do we set up networking, how do we replace the after event cocktail, how do we do one-on-one meetings alongside the webinars. I haven't seen great solutions, but I think we're still experimenting, and we're going to see stuff that's going to make that easier.
Very interesting. Yeah, we agree. It's probably going to be a combination, a hybrid, very, very dynamic. Hopefully our outsourced to LAC next year will be physical, will be presential, but for sure we're going to have to combine in all our networking activities, both the virtual and the physical. So we'll see how this evolves. We're all learning. Are there some niches, specific niches of PropTech or ConstruTech positioned to benefit from the changes to how we're doing business during the pandemic and beyond? And in what ways are others adapting to their business models to the new reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of, like I said, there's two things. There's technologies that might be directed specifically at the pandemic. So whether it's air filtering technologies, touchless entry. I got a pitch deck from a company yesterday that uses artificial intelligence and facial recognition. When you walk up to a door, scans your face. If you're registered to access that building, there's an electric arm that opens the door for you, so you don't have to touch anything. Whether that stuff will have long-term lasting demand is unclear. But anything, there's a lot of what's going on now is simply an acceleration of trends that already existed. So remote online notary, for example, part of a real estate transaction has typically been the notarization. There were online notary laws passed in about a dozen states out of the 50 US states over the last several years, but adoption's been very, very slow. Now, everybody wants to do it. So remote online notary is absolutely a thing now, and it's going to continue to grow. And I don't think that's going to disappear. That's going to continue. It doesn't make sense the way we used to do it, pandemic or no pandemic.
Acceleration of previous trends, as we see in many other sectors. Tigre, with companies like BrickSave from Argentina now launching in Brazil, Housed from Panama, At Home from Mexico, and Everywhere Office also from Mexico, the Latin American Caribbean PropTech ecosystem is gaining traction. You were mentioning that before. According to our research at the IDB, there are 350 PropTech companies in LAC, with Brazil leading the pack and followed by Mexico. How do you see, to take it to our region, how do you see the region's PropTech landscape evolving during these times, and in which segments do you see the most untapped potential for our entrepreneurs which are watching you today?
Yeah, well, for us, I think the challenge to finding interesting stuff in the region is something that can scale beyond the home market. So if you want to do the Peruvian version of Zillow, and that's great, it might be a good business in Peru, but that doesn't have a huge addressable market. That's not a company, even if it does well, it's not a company that you're going to take to the US or to Europe, to larger markets. So, I mean, I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that, but that's not interesting to us as a venture capital investor. We're more excited about things that technology might come from Latin America, but it can be more widely applicable. So, yeah, you mentioned the 3D visualization stuff. I mean, great engineering teams from Latin America, relatively inexpensive, can develop something, and then we can help them deploy that into the US market. That is exciting, right? So it's not a function of this works in Latin America. Rather, it was developed in Latin America, but it can work anywhere. Those are the kinds of businesses that we're most interested in.
Great, and that's from our also O2LAC. Actually, we have seen architectural firms for a very long time using VR, and we think that's a trend that is affecting many other sectors as well. What are the elements that make PropTech startups sort of stand out in a pitch competition? If they were to convince Tigre, that we're really good at this, what are the elements that you would think in a post-COVID reality makes them attractive, sexy for a fund?
Yeah, so we look for a lot of things, but the three most important things. I think number one, far and away, is the founder or founders, the founding team. We're looking at capability, drive, commitment, all of those intangible things. But we're also looking for, I don't know who coined this phrase, but in the startup world, we talk about product market fit, but it's also important to have founder market fit. So the founder of the startup, why are they doing this business and not some other business? That they actually have some unique and differentiated understanding of the problem they're trying to solve. And that's particularly important, I think, in real estate, because a lot of the early attempts at doing stuff that maybe didn't get traction were technology people who said, oh, let's do a PropTech something, construction in particular, and they don't understand their market. And that's a massive, that's going to fail. We see it all the time, people building interesting technology kind of for the sake of building technology, but they haven't figured out how to go to market. And so looking for that kind of founder market fit. Second thing is it a big enough market? And I kind of alluded to this with the last question. So, if you're successful, how big can it be? Because we're investing at really early stage. It's very high risk. We know that a lot of our investments may go to zero. And so we have to believe that the companies we invest in, any given one of them could generate 100x return for us, which means they have to have a really big market. So if you're going after something too focused, and you know, like I say, it might be a good solution, there might be a business there, but it's not a business that's going to be big enough to justify our putting capital into. And then, you know, the third thing is traction, and we're trying to invest at kind of that critical point, the inflection point where the business really takes off. So we're very early, we're very comfortable with risk. We're trying to figure out who actually does have product market fit. We do want to see traction, which generally means revenues, not necessarily. It could be usage, you know, recurring users, time on the site, etc. But some evidence that there are people out there that really value the tool that you built, will use it and will pay for it. Now, it doesn't have to be tremendous amounts of revenue, but we're not going to invest in an idea on a PowerPoint, right? Those days are gone. It's really not expensive to build a minimum viable product, put it out in the market and test it and get some paying users. And if you can't do that, you know, we're probably not interested.
Excellent. Fit, size of market, growth potential, and give me a product that can actually work. Excellent. And you've said, Tigre, that now is a great time to begin a startup. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and particularly why this is a good time to innovate in PropTech?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, and this is, there's data on this from previous recessions, and a lot of great companies have been founded in the wake of an economic recession. And you know, part of it is there's going to be less competition. There's going to be less funding. It's going to be harder to get funded, but the good companies will be able to find capital, and they'll find a lot more white space. So I think that's a big part of it. If you look at some of the biggest unicorns of the last few years, companies like Airbnb, Uber, you know, they came out of the 2009 Great Recession. In fact, Open English, it was started a little bit before that, but really the first funding round was 2009.
As Winston Churchill said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And so we'll end up with a question on the actual ecosystem beyond entrepreneurs, which are good ideas to create an ecosystem in our region, in Latin America, taking some lessons from Miami, for example, beyond the entrepreneurs, but actually the regulators and the governments. And you have a couple of minutes for that, and this is going to be the last question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very hard to legislate a tech ecosystem. It's about finding people who care and bringing them together. You know, 1 + 1 is more than 2, and having creating forums for the community to leverage each other, ways for people to connect, and like you said, they're going to have to be virtual from now on, at least for a while. And really, identifying who are the people that are really going to be successful and kind of supporting them. So I think, you know, some of the early investments in Miami, certainly around creating the tech ecosystem, have been, how do we make entrepreneurship available for everyone? And, you know, I think that's a noble idea, and I believe that everyone should have an opportunity. But if we're going to create a really successful tech ecosystem here or anywhere, there have to be success stories. And we've got a few now in Miami. I mean, Open English is one, but there's bigger ones. You know, Magic Leap, the predecessor, Magic Leap, Mako Surgical, was a huge success. Its founders have gone on and invested a bunch of other great startups. And in recent years, there've been many others, slightly smaller ones. But we're starting to have success, and we're starting to have this virtuous cycle where successful entrepreneur builds a business, gets some cash out. How can I forget eBuilder, which is a Miami-based construction management software company that sold in a strategic sale 2 years ago for $500 million. And those guys are now out in the community helping other startup founders, becoming angel investors, and that starts that virtuous cycle. So I think you need to you need to bet on some winners, and you need to make sure that you've got some success stories, because that not only creates some momentum to encourage founders, to encourage VCs to pay attention, right? It's always been difficult to get investors from out of the region to come in, and so a lot of what we've focused on is, you know, our fund is just a small part of it, but there have been a number of early stage funds that have opened up in the last few years in South Florida, and that's been a huge part of it. But they need to see that there's opportunities here, that it's worth their time. And so I think really having people that focus on who are the winners going to be, and really bringing to bear everything they can to support those, because having some successful exits to point to, that's how you create the virtuous circle that then feeds the ecosystem.
Tomás Tigre Wenrich, it's been a pleasure. It's very clear why they call you Tigre, a disruptor, an innovator, an investor in the PropTech space. Thank you so much for your time, for your ideas, for your words, and we hope the audience has enjoyed this as much as I have, and learned a lot, and hopefully many of our entrepreneurs will be knocking virtually on your doors. Thank you so much, Tigre. It's been great.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been a